It's very hard to know. Yeah, so I would say two things. One is, if you want to help people in another part of the world, before you undertake to do that, go learn something about them. So you can't do it by sitting in your office in Washington, D.C. You can't know what people in Niger need. You have to actually go. So you need to try to acquire, to the best extent you can, the actual localized knowledge about what people would actually need. But I will say something else. It's not quite exactly what we talked about, or what I talked about in the talk, but I think might address maybe the larger issue you're worried about. So my own view is that a lot of places in the world where there is still great poverty, and there are places, obviously, that where there's great poverty, a lot of it is not because of a lack of beneficence. It's because of systematic injustice. So people are not allowed to own property. They're not allowed to have clear title to their property. Whole classes of people are accorded secondary and underprivileged rights relative to other people. They're not allowed to enter markets. They're not allowed to start businesses. So I would say the first thing to do is to instantiate justice. Before you try to help people, first stop hurting them. So in my own view, the first rule of political economy is the same as the rule of medicine. What's the Hippocratic Oath of medicine? First, do no harm. An enormous amount of things that other countries do for and to people in poor countries and even their own people is injustice. So if we can stop that first, and it's a little bit like, I'll make one other quick analogy. You know, when you, one day maybe, I don't know if you have children, if you one day come to have children, what do you tell your kids? I mean, the first thing you want your kids to do, tell me if I'm right, Dr. Berger, is keep your hands to yourself, keep your promises. If you make a promise, keep it. If you don't want to keep your promise, don't make it, and keep your hands to yourself. So don't tell me all the great things you did today if you were also hitting people all day long. Stop hitting people, and then we can talk about the good things you did. And I think it's the same thing there. Stop causing people injury, and what might happen, and here's an Adam Smithian point. Adam Smith was an optimist. It may well be that if we just stop committing injustice, if we stop keeping people poor, just remove the obstacles, guess what will happen? They can improve their situations all on their own. It's like a miracle. People being poor doesn't mean you're irrational, doesn't mean you're broken and need to be fixed, doesn't mean you're a child and not really adult. It often means you just haven't had the opportunity to improve your own situation. So that's a bit of a long answer to your question, but it's something I feel passionately about. A lot of the policies, including international policies that we have, actually prevent people from entering into markets and prevent them from owning property. Many countries in Africa, women can't own property. Half the population is not allowed by law to own property. Imagine what kind of prosperity would ensue if you just got rid of that restriction. Even a woman could start a business. Hallelujah. That would be transformative in these countries. So these kinds of things I think can be the first thing. And if there's something left after that, then you and I can talk about starting our own charity and we'll get it right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you think Smith's view of justice has room for intent or just consequences? And if only intent, do you see that as problematic? Or if only consequences? I mean.
Only consequences. It's a good and hard question. There are two ways from which to view it. If you're thinking about your own conduct, you're trying to evaluate, am I a good person or not? One of the things you need to do is to look not at just your actions, your externally observable actions, but you have to look at what your motivations are too. The problem is, if I'm trying to judge you, I can't tell what your motivations are. So if we want to have institutions that might reward or punish people, what should we reward or punish them for? On Smith's view, it shouldn't be for their intentions, because we can't know what people's intentions are. What can we know? We can know what you did. So I think Smith takes a kind of pragmatic view that when we're setting up public institutions and we're thinking about evaluating other people, we have to look at what they actually do. So is it possible that you can be a perfectly well-intended person, but the actual results of all your actions are terrible? Yeah, that's possible. That's a bummer if that happens. It's possible. And the reverse. Maybe you're just a terribly intended person. You hate everybody, but somehow or other you just happen to be in weird positions where you try to hurt people and it turns out it turns out to help. Could that happen too? Yes, it could happen too. But I think the Smithian view is when we're judging other people, as opposed to judging ourselves, when we're judging other people, we have to look at what they actually do. And there's a really good reason for that too, and it's sort of a practical reason. Practical reason is if you know, I won't say me, if I know that you're going to be judging me on the basis of the results of my actions and the results, rather than my intentions, now I might say, but that's not fair, you should look at my intentions. Fair enough. But if I know that you're actually judging me on the basis of what's externally observable, I am going to be much more solicitous to make sure that what I do actually does lead to good consequences, because I know that's what you're looking at. You're not looking at what my internal intentions are because you don't know what those are. So it has the unintended effect of disciplining people to really think hard about, well, what will actually be the consequences of my actions, not just what do I intend, but what will actually result. I think Smith thinks that's a very good, unintended, but practical consequence. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Good question. That sounds like somebody who's read the book before. Am I right? Yeah, okay. Any others? Yes, ma'am. All the way in the back.
So if we have something like a moral duty to rescue a drowning child, but we don't have an obligation to beneficence, how can you resolve having a duty to something but not a consequence for drowning?
No, so good question. Here's how I think you can resolve that. There are two kinds of obligations that you, so let me back up. Is it possible in Smith's view that we could have actual duties of beneficence? Answer that is yes. So there can be positive duties, there can be negative duties. The difference is which ones of those can other people coerce us into following? Only the negative ones. And part of the reason for that goes back to the question you were asking, because we can't actually know, on the one hand, what you were intending to do. And on the other hand, we also can't know what you really ought to have done unless we are intimately familiar with your situation. So, will you, as an individual, or will I, as an individual, actually have cases where we have a moral duty to act? Yes. Does that mean it's enforceable by society? Not necessarily. So to your question, well, how would we maybe adjudicate those things? If there's some way, I suppose what do we say about the passerby, the one who walks by and sees and lets the child drown? What would we say about that person? Well, in Smith's view, you can't say he was unjust. You could only say, oh, he was insufficiently beneficent. But it doesn't end there, does it? What else could you do? Well, we could put your picture in the newspaper with a caption that says, moral monster. Think about the effect that would have on you. Or we start tweeting about you with the hashtag moral monster. What kind of effect does that have on you? It doesn't put you in jail, doesn't cause you injury, at least not directly, but is that going to have some effect on you? Holy cow, is that going to have an effect on you? The mere thought that that could possibly happen might already discipline your behavior. So one way that we can adjudicate these kinds of cases of people who are, in fact, insufficiently beneficent, Smith thinks, is socially. We should call on our own social power of moral condemnation. Stop being friends with that person. If you find out that I could have helped somebody in a case like that and didn't, don't hire me. Don't be friends with me. Tell other people not to be friends with me. That's a very powerful incentive. It's not a perfect mechanism. So things still slip through the cracks, but they'll slip through the cracks. Something will slip through the cracks no matter what you do. But Smith thinks that's a much more powerful, that kind of social suasion and approbation and disapprobation is much more powerful than many people actually think. He thinks we're inherently social creatures. And if you think people are thinking badly about you, well, you yourself, think about it. Take one tiny example, you probably talked about it in your class. So a tiny example of Smith's, one of his favorite examples. You go out with your friends tonight after the talk, let's say, and you're studying calculus or getting a beer or whatever you're doing. You're with a group of friends, and you decide you want to tell the group a joke, and you tell a joke. Do you all remember this example from the Theory of Moral Sentiments? You tell them a joke, and after you tell the joke, it's one of your favorites. So you tell it, and you laugh, and it's really funny, and then you realize nobody's laughing. They're all just staring at you. Imagine for just a second what you feel like. Now, did anybody assault you? Did they put you in jail? What's the lesson you're going to learn? Don't do that again. And you never will. Nobody has to actually do anything, but the mere thought that people are thinking negatively about you has a very powerful effect on human behavior. It's not perfect. We sometimes ignore it, and sometimes we should ignore it. But it has a surprisingly powerful effect. And in many cases, it's actually more effective than calling up a police officer and saying, please come arrest this person for telling a bad joke.
Any more? We have time for one or two more questions. All right, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
You can just email me by Joe's But, so absolutely, there's actually of people. Well, I did good better.
Well, I